This is the panel on the Honolulu Rail project that's being sponsored by the Libertarian Party of Hawaii. It's Tuesday night, August 31st, 2021. We're going to have a panel discussion with three knowledgeable experts on the rail project. We're going to talk about various things which are happening, things which may have happened that went wrong, things which we might want to look into, and where we have been and where we are in terms of the project, which I think now is in its, like, since it's was first suggested, which was, well, this is not the first suggested rail project. We had one suggested by Frank Fossey back in the 70s, but this current project, I think, got its initiative around 2003 or 2004. And I'm going to turn it over to our panel. I think that I will start with my friend Cliff Slater, who I know has been active in, pointing out problems of the rail and hoping that maybe we could prevent the rail project from ever getting started and other things. And Cliff, if you could just share with us a few bits and pieces about your history with the rail, how you got interested in the project, what you've done in terms of involvement, and where you think we are right now.
Well, I've been in it since 2004 when Frank Fossey got back into office and started with his rail project, which we eventually defeated in 1992. And then we've moved and we went through that absolutely absurd project that they had for BRT in urban Honolulu, which was, for those of you who remember it, it was a really absurd project. And we went from that and then into the current one, which started, as you said, in 2004 with the election of Mufi Hanneman as mayor, and has got us to this position where we are today. And I've been saying lately that I never forecast this kind of a situation. I didn't forecast that they would have any kind of cost overruns until they got into Dillingham, and then had to face going through the urban core. But we have run up this incredible bill on going through farmland. It's just absolutely unbelievable. And I think that the FTA guys who Ron Fisher, when he wrote recently, said they've never seen anything like this, the FTA, and they've had some absurd projects, okay, but they've never had anything like this. And that's so where we are at the moment is that we're now approaching completion towards the Middle Street station, and it's a question of where do we go from here. I think everybody is familiar that we don't have enough money to finish it, thank God. Okay, it's one thing that will prevent us from devastating the Honolulu waterfront. Just aside from the money, what it will do to the city environmentally, it's just unconscionable. That's where we are.
All right. I'm getting a little bit of breakage while you're speaking. You might want to check to make sure that there's not an audio problem. Let's move on to our friend Natalie. Natalie Iwasa, who's currently a non-voting member of the HART board and has been since January. I've known Natalie on and off from Small Business Hawaii and things I've discussed with Grassroots Institute as an activist and a community organizer for many years. And so I would be interested to hear from Natalie about how you got interested in the rail and how it came to pass that you're now, attending meetings and seeing what the discussions are and what plans there are moving forward and where you think we are right now.
Well, first of all, thank you for asking me to be a participant this evening. I need to mention that because I am on the board, we have particular rules that we have to follow, and I have to state that I am expressing my own opinions and not representing the board or any board position. So I just want to get that disclaimer out there. With respect to where we're at, as Cliff mentioned, we don't have enough money right now. And so there are a couple things that are going on at this time to try to get things back on track. And that is, with respect to tracks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So figuring out the wheels, why they don't fit and what they're going to do to fix that part of it is kind of ongoing. That's been going on for a little while. The bigger thing is the recovery plan. I think a lot of people know that the FTA has been holding back about $744 million since 2014. So, this is ongoing now for about 6 years or so. And they are waiting for HART to say, this is our plan, this is the total cost, this is how we're going to pay for it. There was a recovery plan in 2018, which had to be redone and was approved in 2019. That's the current plan that we're under, but the funding is not there. So what HART is doing is working on revising that plan, updating it, and also a revised financial plan. So that's a big thing. The deadline for that is the end of the year, and it does have to be approved by City Council. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on right now that we're in process and have to have approvals at various levels. The HART board has to approve it. The City Council has to approve it. So for anybody who's concerned, I would highly encourage them to submit testimony, both at the HART board and at the City Council. I think you also asked how I got involved. So I've been very involved with City Council for like 15 years. And people kept telling me, oh, there's a HART board meeting. You should go to the HART board meeting. There's a rail meeting. You should go to the rail board meeting. So I started attending probably about 5-6 years ago, maybe a little longer ago than that. And I guess people who make decisions, such as the House Speaker, Scott Psyche, became aware of what I've been doing and the errors I've been pointing out, and just trying to get things straightened out, because as Cliff and Panos both know, there are so many things with this project that are problem areas. And so I got a call January 4th, and Scott Psyche asked me to be on the board, and I said yes, because I felt that I could make a difference in trying to at least get some policies in place or procedures in place so that we can try to mitigate the risk of wasteful money or fraud potentially, and that kind of thing. So I guess I hope that answers your question. And
it does for now, but we will have more. There's
okay.
more.
Okay.
More. But before we have more from you, we'll have a nice helping from our friend Panos. So I know that Panos, you've been following this for a long time and have been a critic of the rail, and also has suggested other ways we could have spent our money to achieve better traffic flow results. So why don't you give us a little bit about your background with the rail issue, what you've been chiefly involved in trying to discuss or change, and where you think we are sitting with the rail right now. And then later we can come back to a bit more of that.
Sure, thanks, Tracy. Hi, everybody. Well, basically, I came to Hawaii in 1990, just a little late to help Cliff with, his fight against the fussy idea at that time. But soon afterwards, the city came with another terrible idea, as Cliff mentioned, the BRT. And we got together and we've been together since that, trying to make a reasonable transit policy for the city.
Power on.
And of course, then Mufi Kahneman came, and unfortunately, both Cliff and I and a few other people did help him get elected
Power on.
because he was running against Duke Bainum at the time, and Duke Bainum was openly for light rail. So we supported Mufi Kahneman to avoid the light rail. Little did we know that he was a turncoat. In fact, I actually interviewed to become his director of transportation. And the qualifying question was, much to my surprise, are you pro-rail? Because Mufi is planning to install rail. So that became, to me, a calling card of, how two-faced these people are. And, I had to do something about it. And since then, I've been trying, obviously not very successfully. And pretty much what we said, it's going to be bad. It's 2-3 times as bad. Right now, in terms of an update, I think we are stuck because the feds are not releasing the money. We have run out of money. They are not letting significant contracts past Middle Street. Hopefully they have enough money to do something and start operating the rail between Middle Street or somewhere about and Couple A, because we've been paying through the nose. We've been inconvenienced through the nose for all these years. And, the public deserves some rail service. So they need to get started. But unfortunately, that's not their priority, to use whatever funds they have to provide the public the service they deserve. They've been paying for rail for over 12 years now. We need to have rail service. And then if we ever have monies, perhaps take it to its intended ending, which is, for this system, there is no intended ending. Every time you end it somewhere, it doesn't work. And immediately they turn around and they say, see, we told you it needs to go to Ala Moana. Once it reaches to Ala Moana and it doesn't work, then they say, see, we told you it needs to reach the UH and Waikiki and East Kapolei and on and on and on. That's the constant excuse that essentially you have to create rail lines everywhere to begin working, and they never do. I mean, historically, the numbers are declining. And of course, if you add the layer now of Uber services and then COVID, the public's, being reticent to be 300 in one vehicle at a time. So now we're talking about minuscule levels of daily ridership. Yeah, there may be a few busy runs at around 6:30 or 7:30 in the morning, and then again at 4:30 and 5, but nothing else. So we paid billions for practically empty trains to run back and forth when they start running, which Caldwell actually revealed that he expects that when he was these last days of his mayorship, he revealed that 2030, it's going to be the expected year, which is, beyond ridiculous in all fronts.
All right, well, make sure that if you're not on the panel that you are muted, because I'm hearing occasionally some background noise. It sounds like someone in the background, a woman's voice that's kind of distracting. Okay, so there's kind of a summary and an overview, and there's a couple of things which immediately come to mind in my estimation. One is the causes of the cost overruns. Why are we getting the cost overruns? Why are they, and compared to what the gentleman that I think Cliff was relating to, who wrote in the paper from the federal government, how these were so massively excessive compared to what they've seen in other projects around the country. And I will confess that I have worked on budgets that are subsidized with state money, and I've seen how people operate. And I think that the oversight in terms of the expenditure of the money and the possibility of people simply charging, say, $60,000 or $70,000 for work that they might charge $3,000 for in the private sector, and no one asking about that. I think that that's something that occurs to me that could be in little by little increments, plus the delays and the apparently not having, I guess there's all sorts of things about the utilities and infrastructure, which they have encountered, which, you know, you'd think they would have encountered on the day they started planning and not when they had built, you know, 10 or 15 miles of rail. So do any of you have anything to comment into as to why you think this project has gotten so out of hand in terms of the budget? I mean, did they just pull out a lowball number to begin with so that we would approve this? And this is the real number we've got now, or what's been happening? Who would like to weigh in on that? Cliff?
I think that Panos would be best to discuss the whole thing from the civil engineering point of view, but from a straight business point of view, the way they went about it and dividing the whole thing up into various segments instead of dealing with one major engineering company to handle the whole thing and having a very tight forecast would have sorted this whole thing out. I really do, and kept it down. I mean, you these things are never going to come in on budget, but they would have kept it down, I would think, to this maybe the 7-8 million mark for completion. But again, I don't think it would have ever happened, because if you remember, the general public was in the belief that the project was about a $3.5 billion project, of which the feds were going to cough up $1.5 billion. And then it was only revealed the day before the election, before the public was aware that the project was now 5.3 billion. I think that if they had known that it was going to be 7 billion going in, that it might have got, I think almost certainly would have been rejected, because it only got a vote of 50.6%. Thinking it was most people 3.5 billion. So
I agree with that. It was a close vote. I'm not sure that most voters really have a conception of 3.5 versus 7 billion. They just know 7 billion is twice as much. But, you know, a lot of times people, when they think it's government money, they kind of think it's monopoly money. And I've encountered people who think that way, particularly if it's federal money. That's manna from heaven. We don't pay federal taxes, apparently. Natalie, so you're involved in the discussions, and I'm sure aware of different things that are going on in terms of the budget and how what kind of oversight they've had over this. And do you think that there have been, you know, problems over the years in the oversight or in the auditing, or just in the general planning, or in just, as Cliff said, maybe it's just they undersold the budget to begin with, and maybe these overruns aren't really overruns, they're just based on a lowball figure to begin the project. So what is your perspective on that?
I think it's probably a combination of a bunch of different factors. For example, I remember when Caldwell was testifying at the state legislature, and he said, we learned from the failed attempt with the Fosse train, we learned that we need to go get the money first and do the planning later. So, you know, anytime you put something into play without planning for it adequately, you know, I think the expectation should be that the costs are going to be higher than what you originally estimate, because how can you even have a reliable estimate if you don't have the plans completed? And we still don't have the plans all done. So I think that's a big part. Another thing that added to that is the Mufi-Hanneman signed contracts, or at least one major contract in 2009 before the full funding grant agreement was approved. And that alone cost us at least 100 million. And that was a couple of years ago when they had done the estimate of the cost related to that. So I'm sure it's more than that now. With respect to the oversight and the budget, you know, one of the things I've always been trying to change is the staffing and the PR side of things. Now, granted, on an annual budget, it is not a whole lot of money when you're looking at $5-10 billion, but when you add it up over the life of this, which is now going to be who knows how long, 2 decades, 3 decades, I don't know, is the PR. And, you know, finally they have cut some of that back, but we know they spent money on coloring books. They go to these grade school presentations to sell rail to our children. You know, so a lot of that money I feel was wasted. And with this, the way it's set up, there's still a disagreement on who actually provides the oversight for the budget. Because the city charter to me is very clear. It says Hart will submit a budget to the mayor by December 1st. And the mayor, basically, he doesn't do anything. He just gives it to the city council. And the city council can approve with or without changes. That's basically what the charter says. But the mayor has never signed any of the budgets because he believes that the city council has no authority to do so, to change them, to modify them in any respect. So this is an ongoing issue. And I don't know if that's why the council, in my opinion, hasn't really made very many changes to the budget. This last year, they did cut some out of the budget, but pretty much it's gone through the way that it was presented by the Hart board. So, you know, that I think adds to it as well, that I really wonder how many people are digging into these numbers and really understanding what's behind them and what we're spending the money on.
Yeah, because like I said, I mean, generally the government type projects that I've been involved with in terms of being the auditor, although it's kind of a joke because we're not allowed to actually ask to see what work was done for the fee. We're only allowed to say the fee was spent according to the budget. So a check was written, it was spent, the budget was approved, the money was spent. So our audit says, all right, we spent the budget money. What we're not allowed to do is to go to the person who did the work and say, we'd like to see the work, see how much work you actually did, see if there's a justification just because it was budgeted, that the amount of time and effort that was put into this is something in relationship to what you were paid. I think that's very important when these major contracts that are done, because you can lose, you know, in $1 billion contract, and Natalie, you're talking about the details that go on during the year in the smaller budget, you can lose tens of millions of dollars in the decimal points in these contracts. And I think the reason for the PR is the people who are receiving the money for rail, whatever they're paid to do, whether it's legitimate construction, whatever, would like to see the money continue, and they're concerned that public opinion might stop that from happening. So let me turn it over to Panos, so I won't continue to pontificate. And Panos, can you talk about the cost overrides and perhaps give us a perspective on maybe some of the engineering issues that they've not taken on properly, which have cost us money?
Well, I did some analysis 2-3 years ago of the construction costs, and there was nothing too particularly worrisome in terms of, you know, the amount spent of construction, but that was just the awards. In other words, how much money you gave to Hawaiian dredging, for example, to do 5 or 6 stations. There was nothing outrageous about that. If you look at these contracts, on the face of it, the construction parts were okay. However, attached to that, there was a significant amount of soft costs, engineering, design, and oversight, which is normal to have. And particularly in small projects, it can be up to 20% because, you know, the project is not big, there isn't enough money. But for very large projects like this, multi-billion-dollar projects, typically the soft costs are in the single digits 5 to 8%, 10%. In our case, most of our soft cost is in the order of 30 to 40%. And part of it is actually HART itself. The biggest joke is when Peter Carlisle was running for mayor, and he was supporter of HART, and he says, you know, we need to have HART. It'll take politics out of rail, and it's not going to cost us a dime. He literally said that. I mean, as if it's going to be a free board that does anything. And then they got expensive offices, hyper expensive engineers. In the old project that Cliff was working on, everything was done inside DTS. The same engineers that used to do other projects, such as road projects, etc., most of their time became oversight of the rail project. Now these engineers are pretty much sitting on their hands because guess what? The rail is going to solve all the problems, so the city doesn't need to work on other stuff. And then we hire completely new people in a brand new building, very, very expensive rents, electricity, etc., to supposedly run the project. I mean, recently some audit showed mainland engineers, several of them, dozens of them, $500 to $600 an hour. These are outrageous rates for engineering and engineering management. And in addition, I believe because of the layers of subcontracts, I still think, and I'm smelling a rat there. That's why DOJ was involved, the Department of Justice, that basically people are getting paid, or subconsultants or subcontractors, to pretty much do nothing, faking the same work multiple times and getting paid for it. Something to that extent. Obviously, if there is no evidence to that, nobody will be taken to task. But I suspect that's what they're looking. So not necessarily overcharging, but charging in some funny way multiple times to do similar or the same work. Because as I said, the construction costs for building the actual pieces of the infrastructure do not seem to be out of whack. So the contractors out there, for example, Kiwi Pacific built the first 10 miles all the way to Aloha Stadium for roughly $700 million. That was a bargain for such, you know, a guideway to be built, just a guideway. They built, of course, and then they laid the steel rails on it, and they made some mistakes. If you remember, they had to change the shims, and then they had to do it on their own, and there were a few change orders, etc. But the basic project was done for $0.7 billion, essentially half of it. Remember, the rail is 20 miles, and they built the first 10 for under $1 billion, including change orders. So something very fishy started happening after that, when particularly at the point that Kiwi Pacific refused to bid to any subsequent segments because the layers of mismanagement inside HART became too much to tolerate as a construction company, and they didn't want to deal with that anymore.
Very good, or very bad, as the case may be.
Right.
So I want to talk a bit about some of the politics of this and the lost opportunities of having sunk so much money of this into this project versus perhaps, I mean, there was discussion of doing a double-decker highway. There's other things we could have done with our money in terms of a traffic solution. And I will share a couple things which are political from the two of our former mayors whose names have come up. First of all, in terms of Mufi Hanneman, when I talked to him and told him I didn't think that there was this was before he was mayor, by the way, that there was a chance that this rail would be at all anything that would benefit the city unless it was part of a development plan that they had. And I think that the development plan for EVA, where landowners in the EVA district and other people who are looking at developing things along the rail line, and they talk about putting affordable housing and other things out there. There's a lot of other people who seem to feel they're going to make a lot of money because the value of the land along the rail is now worth a lot more. And to me, it's like if you live closer to the rail, then maybe you should actually pay more property tax because you have better access to a public service which was paid for by everybody. And the thing about Peter Carlisle deliberately, there was, before we started digging and actual construction work. Carlisle wanted to start it out in the country because the theory was once we got it built into close to the city, no one would ever agree to stop it because it would be foolish. And the idea that we would continue to throw money on it to recover the money we'd spent getting it to wherever it's gotten to would be a political stimulus to keep sending the money to complete it. That was the theory. So in other words, if we end up with a rail line that goes from the country to the country and we spend all the money, that's dumb. We should spend the rest of the money and get the value rather than starting in the city. So those are the two things politically that I've heard from two people who are former mayors. So Panos, I know you've talked a lot about, other things we could have done. Where are we probably the biggest loser in terms of the money we've sunk into rail, in terms of other opportunities?
Yeah, that's exactly something that particularly in the last few months, Joe Uno played that card very strongly, but apparently didn't make a difference in terms of the conscience of politicians, is the opportunity cost, which is very significant. And unfortunately, right now, it's pretty much gone because we put all our eggs in this basket, and we're taking it for sure at least to Middle Street or a little beyond at the cost of $10 billion. Well, for $10 billion, we would have solved, for example, the energy problem on Oahu. I mean, we could have done something, a combination of wind, solar, natural gas, et cetera, to take us away from importing very expensive and polluting oil. That's one of them. But of course, that's not transportation, although indirectly it is, because you start having more clean vehicles, clean buses, et cetera. So it becomes a win-win. In terms of transportation, we could have done a lot of cheaper projects, like 10 miles of reversible lanes to take the bulk of the congestion from commuting, west. Which is really a corridor that it's extremely non-resilient. In other words, we have 6 to 8 lanes per direction, but if something happens in that highway, the people, to exaggerate, they're dead. I mean, they have to wait sometimes half an hour, sometimes half a day for that situation to clear in order to go back home. There is no redundancy. There are no parallel routes. Something, of course, in the middle of the city, we have it, congested or not, at least there are parallel routes. We have none past essentially Salt Lake. It's a single highway, particularly after, the highways merge at Aloha Stadium, that's it. Kamehameha Highway now with the rail in it, actually it has very limited capacity. Unfortunately, that's where the path was going actually throughout Kamehameha Highway or along IEA and Pearl City. That was about 6 miles of the 10 miles of the reversible highway that we were planning and proposing, and actually Cliff was successful in forcing the city to analyze in the AA the alternatives analysis. And there, this is one of the things that started changing my thinking about, being in this state, because it was just too egregious that they would put it there, they will do the analysis correctly, but then they had 3 lanes approaching downtown and they put a stop sign on it. A stop sign on it at the end of it to control the flow in order for essentially to produce numbers that they're comparable with the rail. And they didn't want to, because if they simulated in a reasonable way, they would have showed that people will gain a lot in terms of short travel times. And they did their best to undermine the project for design reasons so that its performance parameters were similar or worse than of the rail. So finally, they did all this Mickey Mouse business. And of course, the LPA, the locally preferred alternative, became the rail. And we're stuck with it since then. There are also wonderful ideas such as, a submersible tunnel from Iroquois Point to Lagoon Drive. That's a project that it doesn't have really major feasibility problems. It's about 45 miles. So even if it's a couple of billion a mile at $10 billion, it would have made the trip from all those folks Kapolei to Endeavor to downtown less than 10 minutes. which is outrageous. I mean, you cannot even fly by helicopter in 10 minutes from Eva Beach to downtown. But that tunnel would have done that. So there were so many good ideas at the time, but unfortunately now, everybody has put all their eggs on the rail. And most unfortunately, it's going to wind up being a lose-lose, even for behavioral reasons after it opens, because it's going to be so hard for people to use it. People in Hawaii have very complex lifestyles. They have multiple jobs to survive, and they like to do their, natural activities such as, surfing and going to the ocean and going hikes, etc. None of these are feasible with this mode of transportation. Or to make them feasible, you have to make very long connections with other buses, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not really a modern, useful, and fast mode of transportation. So the moment it opens, it's going to be wonderful for a small number of people that they live close to stations and their destination is close to a station. That's going to be unbeatable. But for everybody else, which means 95% of the people on Oahu, it's a non-option. So it's going to wind up being the 1% solution. We're going to spend $12 to $16 billion for 1% of our residents to use it fairly regularly. An extremely bad type of social investment.
Thank you. So, Natalie, so do you know if there were any other, before this rail project got going and before everybody got in, talking about it and then trying to make the best of it, if there were other ideas which might have been out there that we have simply, passed on because we made this choice, that who might have done a better job in terms of transportation and traffic?
I'm not aware of that. I didn't pay real close attention back then, and yeah, I'm not sure about that.
All right. Well, we'll pass to Cliff, and then I've got one more question, and then I'm going to get our audience involved in. As far as the audience is concerned, the best way to ask a question is to be on camera and to wave at me, or to do a wave thing where there's a little symbol you can do at the bottom. I'm not a real professional managing a Zoom thing, so you'll have to bear with me. Cliff, did you want to comment on what Panos just said or add to that?
I not really. I don't think there's anything more to be said on that. But I do want to bring up something which is, I think, just really changed the whole way we're going to be looking at public transportation, and that is pre-COVID. In June of 2019, we had nationally 9.5 billion riders in that month. In June of 2020, right in COVID, okay, we dropped down to 6 billion. In June just passed, we're down to 4 billion. Okay, now this is, FTA has been running almost weekly meetings. I tend to call them panic meetings, while they're trying to come up with ideas of how to improve transit usage. The thing is, you've got two major issues. Number one, it seems like people working from home is going to be far greater than it ever was before. And number two, there's a great fear of being in close quarters with other people, and especially with this very contagious variant. It does not look like this is going to improve much. So if we're looking at ridership that is generally less than half what it was before, and the current ridership like for example, our bus ridership, is the basis for projecting the rail ridership. That's the core kernel that drives the in the program. The core thing that drives it is our current ridership. If they go and to project ridership currently for rail, and if it's really realistic, you've got to bear in mind that none of the previous ridership projections have been realistic. I mean, they're way out. Plus the fact that we're looking at half the ridership today that we're looking at a couple of years ago. We're not looking at many people to get on this train, even if you finished it.
Yeah, and I mean, most of the people who I assume are going to ride the train are people who are currently riding the bus.
Right.
So it would mean not taking fleets of cars off the highway. It would mean taking some of our buses off the highway, which would make traffic flow on the highway better. But if they still need to run the buses back and forth for one reason or another, because we need bus service on the leeward coast, and they go in for mechanical work someplace else, then they're still going to be on the highway empty, which makes the same traffic problem as if the bus was full. So I'm going to open this up now to see if anybody in our audience has a question. I have some more things I can ask, but I think to be fair, since it's now about 7:45, and I know Natalie needs to be at another meeting shortly after 8, that we do allow any of you who've got a question. Fina has a question. Fina, unmute and ask your question.
Aloha, thank you guys all for coming and explaining a little bit more about the rail and its issues to us all. And I actually have a question for all of you, but I'm gonna just probably stick to one. Natalie, since you're on the board of HART and probably has more privy to this, has anyone tossed the idea around of making the rail private or privatizing any of the stops, or as a way of funding for the rail?
I think that has been mentioned. I don't know how feasible it is, and I don't know if that's currently being discussed. We did try the public-private partnership thing, and that didn't work. I think the main reason was it was way too late in the process, but I think it sounds like they're looking at anything that will help bring money in, advertising,
right,
that kind of thing.
I mean, for Hawaii, we have 2 of the world's most richest people in the world that live here in Hawaii. And once you get that rich, you're looking at legacy. You're looking at one the airport. It's named after someone. We could, you can sell the name of a stop to someone. There's other ways of paying for the rail instead of digging into taxpayers' pockets. If someone wants some kind of legacy to be remembered, to be memorialized in a way, I don't see a reason why we couldn't try to work something out. I mean, look at those options. So yeah, that was my question for Natalie. Thank you.
Well, I don't think anybody in their right mind will pay 30 to 50 million to have the Omidyar station in Kapolei. So he can have way more effective ways of spending $50 million. A good example now, your question is very valid. And in fact, when he was running for mayor the second time, Mufi kept saying that public money will pour in and they will support that. And I was actually quite surprised, and sometimes I confronted him, who has put $5,000? And he couldn't even find anybody who has put $5,000. And that's a trivial amount, just to make the point. However, I want to mention something to you which to date is very significant. Ala Moana Center, right? I mean, they're going to get a station. Supposedly they could be getting passengers there by the drones. I mean, 1,000 passengers extra an hour, if that were to be true. So you would think that they would chip in even 10% of the station cost. Crickets, nothing.
Yeah,
Nothing.
So, but, all right, so I
Nobody
gotta follow up.
touches. Nobody touches this project with
As
a
in-
10-foot pole. It's just a money drain. So
Has
Go ahead.
anyone asked these people? And also okay, so we've talked about individuals, but also corporations, like stadiums a lot of times are sponsored by corporations. I mean, this could be the Verizon Rail or whatever.
yeah, it's an interesting thing, and it's something that if they're looking at getting money, they would get money. I mean, to me, and I don't want to get into a conversation about this because that's a whole nother panel issue. But to me, unless we institute casino gambling in Hawaii, there will never be enough money to complete this rail properly. And if the casinos are in Ewa, then they're going to want the airport stop to bring the tourists to the Ewa plane, which would make the money for the train. But I think there's enough opposition in Hawaii to the concept of gambling here that I think that's a whole other issue, and we're not going to be able to really make that as part of our solution at this point. So you've heard from me and you've heard from Fina, and we haven't heard from any of our other people who are on board here. If any of you would like to get in with a question, this would be your golden opportunity. Michelle, do you have something to say? You're in the dark.
Yes, I'm just trying to work out all my issues over here so you guys can see me and all that bull stuff. Okay, so I do have a question for Natalie. I was curious if any of the plans regarding rail consisted of integrating things like solar panels and solar water heating and things that will allow the rail to run off of energy that's not just electricity the taxpayers are paying. You know what I mean? Like what has been done to integrate concepts that will allow the rail to run almost like self-sustainably, if any?
You know, I think the whole power issue is still kind of up in the air. I haven't seen any plans for the electricity, and I forget where I saw it, but there was a statement about the city will be the second largest consumer of electricity on the island, you know, with rail in place. And I don't know where it's coming from at this point. You know, theoretically, they could put the little solar panels up for little signs board here or whatever. But the bigger problem is running the entire rail, and I haven't seen any plan for that yet.
Panos, you might have a comment on that.
Natalie is correct in the statement that it was made out there that after the military, the rail will be the number two, I'm sorry, a single ratepayer for HECO. And their electricity draw, depending on how it's going to be the off-peak and peak. The off-peak, or most of the time, is going to be drawing 30 megawatts. The peak is going to be about 50 megawatts. 50 megawatt is a lot. So solar panels ain't going to do any of that. In fact, about 80 megawatt as maximum is the facility that we have, the Covanta, the waste to energy out in the, so a single power plant, essentially small or medium-sized power plant, is needed to feed the rail the electricity that it needs. So that is a major expense. And I remember that Hanabusa made the statement when she was chairwoman of HART, very similar to Hillary Clinton. It really makes no difference, right? Which meant in this context that we will pay one way or another. Either HART will create its own power plant, so we'll have to pay for it with the rail money, or HART will be a customer of HECO, and then by paying their monthly every year, the monthly charge, we have to subsidize that, because of course, the sad thing about the rail is that at best is going to recover 20% of their expenses from the fare box. That's something a lot of people don't understand, that, even when a rail system is successful, like our bus system, our bus approximately recovers when it was in good operating condition, like pre-COVID, 30%. So for every $100 they spend, 30% comes from the fare box. The other $70 come from you and I, subsidies. So for the rail, this amount will be probably in the order of $90. $10 out of the fares, $90. So basically we'll be paying for the electricity one way or another, via the GET tax or via HICO. I think Cliff has a point here.
Yeah, Cliff, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize, and I know Panos knows this, that he's only talking about the operating costs. Okay, it's nothing to do with the capital costs of the acquiring the buses, the 80 acres that they have for the bus depot, and other facilities they have. That is all, shall we say, for free. Of the operating cost, which is essentially the labor and fuel. We're lucky. Panos said we're lucky to get 30%, usually 27, 28%. So I mean, back in the late 60s and 1970, our bus system was profitable. And then we got into the federal funding of transit, and everything suddenly got socialized. And every bus system in the United States got socialized within 10 years. And the subsidies have just gone through the roof. We're talking federal, state, and county subsidies now are $60 billion a year, and could continually climbing. For what?
All right, so it's a dicey picture any way you want to look at it. Natalie, when do you need to leave? It's almost 8 o'clock now.
I can stay another 5 minutes or so.
Well, then I'll let you be the first one to weigh in on the next question. How's that sound? All right, so right now, there's been a lot of talk about where they're going to try to end the rail based on the budget rather than based on any kind of logical idea as to where the rail might be best ended. And they're talking a lot about Middle Street, which to me, it's like every time I'm on the highway and I get to the place where the two highways kind of dump all the cars together in one spot, which is right in Middle Street, that sounds like, not a great place to also dump all of the rail passengers coming in from Eva. And I don't know about how anybody else feels, but I'm concerned that maybe it would be better than doing that to just stop it wherever it is. And we don't have the money, that's where it stands until another generation comes along and they decide they want to complete it. So why don't you, Natalie, before you go, weigh in on the Middle Street option, and then I'll let Cliff and Panos say their piece. And if you need to leave, you can end and leave.
I think actually Panos would probably is more qualified to answer that question than I am. But one of the things Joe Uno did was he looked at the plans for the stations, and he felt that Lagoon Drive actually made more sense than Middle Street. Middle Street has been thrown out as an option by HART staff, and their reasoning for that really didn't make any sense to me. They said that it was too hard for vehicles to turn left. Well, I don't know. I think your point is more reasonable than what that excuse. But regardless, I think there are still options out there. There just isn't any kind of political will to make them happen or to even discuss them. And, we had it was 27 ideas or so that were looked at earlier this year. And there's a matrix that was publicized, and that still hasn't been discussed. So, without having a full discussion, I think it's really hard for lay people and even people like myself to evaluate it, because we don't know how far can we get. And if we get to Lagoon Drive or Middle Street or someplace slightly beyond that, what does that do to the ridership? I mean, there are people throw out estimates and stuff, but it really hasn't been a thorough discussion. So I think at this point, it's pretty hard to determine where the best point is and how that impacts things like the ridership and the costs, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
And the overall traffic flow, which was
yes, exactly.
the whole purpose of this to begin with. We will solve your traffic. You won't be sitting in traffic anymore if you vote for this. So people voted for it. And 15 years later, they're still sitting in traffic and they're out $5 or $6 billion. So,
so can I just add something about
yes, please do.
The ridership, because I know Cliff and Panos might be familiar with this company. It's Optibus. It's a software company. They work with artificial intelligence, and they're, I guess, pretty big across the US. They put out a survey in May and of transit professionals. And the biggest concern was bringing ridership back. 63% of their respondents were very concerned about bringing back ridership. And then they went on to say, when do you think we will be back to pre-pandemic levels? Very few said 1 year, 26% said 2 years or less, 44% said 2 years or more. But a big chunk, 23%, said that they were convinced that we will never be back at that same ridership level. So, I don't understand why we're not having this discussion. The people who are making the decisions, the city council, the Hart board, this is a huge impact. And, whatever we end up spending, we're going to spend millions, billions more on maintenance over the next few decades. So if we don't understand where our ridership is going to be, which will then drive the net subsidy that taxpayers pay, I think that's really a big problem for us.
Thank you. And thank you for participating.
Actually, that's an excellent point that Natalie made. I think that they generally understood or they generally agreed in temporary terms, everything is fluid, right? Is that basically at best, transit ridership will stabilize at around 80% pre-COVID. But that was for existing, well-appreciated systems, like, the New Yorks, the Chicagos, the Bostons, that they had millions of occasional and regular drivers, passengers. So 80% of them, or approximately, it will vary by market depending on a lot of conditions, will return X years down the road, which could be 1 year, could be 5 to 10 years. But nobody anymore believes that the 100% is attainable because of all the other options that are on the table, plus companies shrinking downtowns. You don't even have to show up in the office anymore. Even if you want to, you cannot. So companies will shrink. So a lot of this will change. Now, the interesting thing is that we are not Chicago or New York or Atlanta with 20-year track record on rail. So our unfamiliar riders will have a very hard time switching to that. So maybe we are for a big surprise that not even achieving the 50% level of what we expect, even the revised one. Remember, from 110, now they dropped it to about 90,000. I don't remember the exact number of daily. So Hart already admitted that it's going to be, and that adjustment, actually, they admitted that it doesn't reflect COVID. It reflects the new realities with Uber and other services. So they dropped from roughly 110,000 to 90,000. How much more are we going to drop because of COVID and general unfamiliarity with the system? So again, we're going to be dealing with pretty low ridership numbers. I think Cliff has a point here too.
Well, I want to let Natalie leave if she needs to leave and not feel that she's compelled to sit here and continue to listen, because then she's probably familiar with a lot of what's being said anyway. But Natalie, I do want to thank you for joining us. And you're saying we're not having the discussion. Well, we're having the discussion, and we're taping it, and pretty soon everybody will be looking at this Zoom meeting all over the state and said, now we're having the discussion. So,
all right, thank you. Thank you so much. And if there are any questions later on, you can just email me and I'll try to answer them as best I can.
Thank you.
If I can add to Panos' remarks on the ridership, we've only had 2 other elevated rail lines in the state, in the country. Miami, where they achieved 13% of the ridership that they'd forecast. And the other one is in San Juan, Puerto Rico. They got 23% of the ridership they forecast. And if you look at the data of riders per mile of track, okay, riders per population, etc., every number you can come up with, there's nothing you can come up with that shows us that we would get anything more than a third of what they've forecast. That's before you have to cut back for the whatever the ridership eventually finishes up at. And I must say, Panos, I think that the June numbers may very well have the guys moving their consensus view down. Shocking number that it's what is it, close to 40%, 45% of the 2019 numbers.
Let me ask a question. Where does the rail end right now? I think Henry's leaving. Henry, are you leaving?
No, I got a question.
Okay, go ahead.
What will be the impact on bus fares and the political backlash?
There's not going to be any change in the bus fares. This is a decision made by the council, but they say that basically bus and rail will share the same fare structure, and there is, well, at least for now, they are not going to have any increases. Of course, if things go very negative, as we said, and they don't recover monies, etc., we don't know where the fare situation is going to be. It's not going to be on the table for another couple of years because there's not going to be an operating train for another couple of years. So we really don't know what's going to be happening at that time.
And the income just doesn't really make the difference anyway, right?
Yeah. Bina, do you want to weigh in on something? Bina?
Yes, I have one. I have another question. Actually, I got more questions, but sorry. You guys were talking about ridership, and you guys are it's pretty clear that you don't want the rail, but it's here, right? So as an alternative to it being a rail and having a constant power bill, this low ridership, are there any plans in trying to make it usable as like perhaps a lane for autonomous driving cars?
Yes, actually, that's the only alternative. You can never allow, because of the superstructure is pretty narrow, you will never allow you and I to drive on it. Theoretically, it would fit 2 lanes of traffic, but there is no shoulders. It's very tight. There is no way if there is an accident for anybody to come and render help. So they will never allow the general public to be there if there was a plan ever to put some ramps. But you can change it to what is called guided bus. If you go to Wikipedia and put in guided bus, you will see that these systems already exist. So instead of trains, you can have rubber tire buses, which is much more flexible than they can get off, at various points. For example, you have a ramp and the bus gets off at Kalihi, the other one gets off downtown. There is a ramp later on down at Ala Moana. So you can replace the steel on steel rail with regular rubber tire buses, but they will work in a special safe case that it's called a guided bus. Autonomous vehicles, well, there is a possibility, yes, that Mr. Tesla will take over and will easily convert those to run quick electric vehicles or vans to provide service. But I think the numbers of transit now, since the rail is going to replace a lot of buses, I don't think you can have, small minivans do the job of the buses. So eventually we'll probably need a guided bus type of system.
If it was a way to like, okay, so the Tesla cars that are out now have a autonomous driving option already. Would there be an option that someone could drive their own personal vehicle like onto the rail structure, and that way they don't have to get into a public transportation vehicle? They could just no.
I don't think an agency will ever allow that as long as the vehicle has a steering wheel. If we're talking now 50 years down the road that there are automated pods that you simply pick your destination and the pod takes you there, yes, the pods can go there because they're fully computerized and they only do one thing. But vehicles with steering wheel, they're not going to be allowed there with anybody being able to take control and create theoretically or accidentally mayhem, because you cannot respond to, you cannot respond. It's all a safety thing. There is no safety way to go and safe way to go and respond to incidents.
So you guys are talking about like the future of what this could, this structure that now exists. Half the island's got it just about now, and how are we going to be using it in the future, especially if we don't have that cart? So I like that you guys are already thinking about pods. You're thinking about ways to use it that it doesn't cost a bunch.
Let me interject here that I'd like to get clarification. Where does the rail line as it's existing right now end?
Close to OCCC.
Close to OCCC.
Yeah.
Okay.
A little past Middle Street.
If we just went on to a full stop and did nothing from now on, just left it, how much money will we have been out for what we've already spent on
Natalie would probably could find that number, but my guess would be 7 billion.
That we've already spent?
If we completely, shatter it today somewhere, that's my guesstimate. 7 billion, give or take 1 billion.
Okay. Cliff, do you have any comment on that, on just stopping it and doing nothing?
Nope. I rely on Panos for that.
Okay, because to me, it's like, considering what we're on the hook for moving forward, maybe the 7 billion is our lesson in not voting libertarian.
Well, the big thing is what people have to face is that whatever we've spent. Okay, what we have to say is, okay, it's going to cost us now $5 billion to finish it. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Hopefully. Okay. Now, so is it worth it? That's the question. The 7 billion is water under the bridge. That's gone forever. So
that's my feeling exactly. That's my feeling exactly, Cliff.
And I don't think it's such a horrendous. People don't realize that rail has been failing the test of consumer choice, okay, since about 1917. Okay, we're over 100 years now. 104 years that it failed, and it's having to bring in government support from that time on. And that's the rail side. Now, the buses is a different issue. But on the rail side, and light rail, forget about it. It's just absurd. But heavy rail, that was not profitable for long.
Yeah. Well, I think the term boondoggle is probably a fair assessment of where we are. And sometimes I go through my mind what I might do if I was running for, some office. And I think my opinion would be that we're best coming to a full stop on rail, doing nothing, eating our losses. And, maybe, like I said, in the future, there may be some magical way where this could be made to work that we haven't analyzed yet. I don't see pouring more money. I think we're throwing good money after bad. And particularly with the maintenance, ongoing maintenance costs, lower ridership. And we've sold it to people as a traffic solution. Whereas in the meetings I attended, you know, early on, and I asked about the traffic, I was laughed out. It's a development plan. It's not a traffic solution. It's never been a traffic solution in the minds of a lot of the people who are the money people behind getting this done. It's to develop land along the rail line and make money off. So I think the public's been misled as to what this was going to be in terms of a panacea for people working in the western half of Oahu to cut down on their commuting time. That's where we are. Anyway, I'm just expressing opinions now, and you know, they're as good as, you know, anything, I guess. So I want to thank the both of you for joining us for our panel tonight. I said we would run from 7 to 8:15, and we started a couple of minutes late because I thought we'd have a few more people. I think what we really need in the Libertarian Party now is what I've been pestering my membership for, is to have, you know, some better membership directors who can get the word out to everybody rather than me sending out email blasts and call people and do all that stuff. And when we find those, I think these will be much better attended. But again, thank you to you both. Have a lot to share. And rail. That's about it.
Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Everybody.
All right, so I'm going to terminate the meeting. And if we all have emails and we can do any kind of following up there. First, I've got to stop the recording. How do I have to press a button. Let's do that.
Aloha.